When I first watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, released in 2019 and directed by Celine Sciamma, all I knew about the film was the high praise it received. I thought the movie was striking, though not particularly moving. When I watched the film the second time, I knew a little about the critical perspective that people had placed on the film, which was that it was a technical piece designed to address the female gaze rather than the male one. The male gaze is a filmic tendency by directors to create a mise-en-scene that is partial, predatory, and lacking a psychological reciprocity from whoever happens to be the object of our attention. A female gaze, we would wager, would seek to realign those back to a position that allows for more erotic tension among equals. While the film does display this change remarkably, in my mind, this critical approach works mostly for the first half of the film. Again, the movie felt striking, but still registered itself as a technical showcase. When I watched the movie a third time, having paid more attention to the special features attached to the Criterion Collection, especially to the interview with Sciamma, I came to realize that Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a haunting ghost story, one where our protagonist, Marianne, is remembering the love affair of a past moment. As the two connect and depart, we realize that, together, they are creating a ghost story that they want to haunt them. Sciamma claims that the story of Orpheus and Eurydice was the connective tissue that attached the central tension of the movie, the space between a present love and a love remembered. Many of the decisions of the movie stem from this central theme. The reason I am bringing this up now is because I think a viewer could stand to gain quite a bit from seeing this film as the director intended. This is not always the case. James Joyce hoped to disappear behind his work, as Ulysses was never meant, in his eyes, to refer back to the author. I think authorial attention is sometimes beneficial and sometimes detrimental. In the case of Sciamma, I bring it up because I think my response changed 180 degrees in that third viewing compared to that first two. I finally felt it to be an emotionally moving experience. It's not perfect, and as I review the film here, I hope to encourage you to watch it while also addressing its limitations. Knowing beforehand that this is a somber ghost story will help in my explanation of why certain decisions work and others, in my opinion, do not. As I am encouraging you to watch, I am going to attempt to make this review spoiler-free. Portrait of a Lady on Fire has the synopsis of a fairy tale. We begin with Marianne teaching a group of young girls how to paint, posing as the model herself. Her students inquire about a painting that Marianne must have done years ago. Marianne looks at the painting and is thrust back into the past. We see her on a boat as it crosses harsh waters with her paints and canvas. She is charged with creating a portrait of a young woman, Eloise, who is set to be married to a wealthy gentleman from Milan. Marianne climbs a steep cliff, crosses a forest, and enters a cold and forbidding chateau that reminds us, perhaps, of Dracula or Beauty and the Beast. Eloise's mother informs Marianne the next day that Eloise is not here willingly, as she was pulled from the convent. She does not want to be married. Her older sister, who was the original suitor, killed herself by jumping to her death on the rocks below. Marianne is here under the guise that she is Eloise's walking partner. Her goal, she is told, is to paint Eloise without her knowing. Sciamma worked with cinematographer Claire Mathon to produce a mise-en-scene with several goals in mind. The first and foremost was to replicate the softness and satin look of portraiture. Much of the look of the film attempted to bring out light from the skin, much like portraits do, in the way that people have this soft, ominous, yet mesmerizing glow. They chose to shoot, as a result, with digital rather than 35mm film, because of this goal, stating that they wanted a high pixel count camera that provided the detail of the skin, particularly its color when flushed. Much of the set of Brittany provided a rich light, and though the weather was particularly good during their filming, to Mathon's disappointment, I think the beauty of the sharp light worked rather well. There is no pathetic fallacy in much of the lighting to coincide with the doomed and somber story told here, which I think works towards the focus on pragmatism from Sciamma. Many of the sets feel abstract because of an emphasis on period detail. As the tone of the movie shifts the chateau from prison to a fortress from the inequality of the outside world, Many of these abstract details become homely and welcome. The attempts to level the romantic tone not only occur with daylight visuals but also with sound, as there is no official score for the film. Much of the sound occurs with diegetic footsteps, paint strokes, and the crashing of the waves. This was a distinct challenge, as Sciamma insisted, but I think it works to realign the movie from a simple romance and into the haunting theme of art as a form of remembered love. All of this to say that I think the coherence of the film is one of its highest qualities, with Sciamma in near total control of her ideas from pre-production into finalization, and we see the fruits of that labor. I'm confident giving the film a 5 out of 5 for coherence. Much of the progression of the film is given texture by several turns that do help to make the somber and minimal film a more varied affair. Unfortunately, the repetitious nature of the scenes, as well as the runtime at 2 hours, pushes the film into tedious territory roughly 3/4 of the way through it. While the script is fantastic, and won for Best Screenplay at Cannes, other aspects of the film do not quite follow suit. While some movies like The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers of the same year, managed to use a cloistered setting with a profound variability and series of escalations, many of the repetitions in Portrait weigh down the overall effect of the film. There is no score that would make a montage possible or effective, for example, thus lending to the idea that there seem to be little directions to go to assuage this issue. It is not like the film did not try, however. There are attempts, with some hallucinatory elements, to add some foreshadowing to the film. And then, of course, there is the added layer of Marianne remembering this affair, rather than it taking place contemporaneously. There is a side plot with our third character, Sophie, that, while it speaks directly to the major themes of the movie, do not connect directly to the erotic tension between the two main characters. Much of the premise of the movie carries us through the first half of the film, but the premise of the gaze occurring in secret is muted in favor of other ideas. Much of the work done to this film carries with it a clinical and abstract look that may detract from the effect this film carries. I actually disagree with this, as this minimalism makes any look from our characters, any breath, seem huge in comparison. There are some looks by Adele Haenel that are so striking that she seems to peer into the camera and towards you, the viewer. Still, with all these points, I must concede that we should place intensity of effect at a 3 out of 5. Much of the complexity of the film arises from the premise combined with the script, making profound statements about what art is and why it is so desired. The movie claims that our ghost stories come from a willingness to leave tension, in this case erotic, unresolved, so as to turn that memory into profound and lasting erotic art instead. It is the poet's choice, as Marianne says, and not the lover's. Much of the script attempts to explicate this thesis by talking about past and present, about how we choose to remember those we love or have loved. For anyone who has not dabbled in art, or for anyone younger than perhaps 20, these decisions will pass right over one's head. Instead, they will latch onto the situation of the movie rather than the story, which is the impossibility of the two to remain together. This parallel structure of situation and story is an incredibly compelling way to have multiple audiences enjoy the film and apply it to their lives, even to the point where both interpretations stand on their own. In that way, much like the context of the film, the interpretation reads much like a fairy tale, one where the ambiguity of the outcome comes from the tension in the process of how that outcome came to be. Marianne and Eloise are constantly fighting to see themselves as equals to each other. Eloise is not just a subject, and Marianne is not just a hired professional. This produces a film that to me is deeply erotic, which is a word I do not often find myself saying as a citizen under the quite sexless Hollywood system in the United States. While the cinematography oftentimes simply places the camera in front of a canvas, there's quite a lot going on for how Marianne sees Eloise as she is painting. Many of the details of the work are charged with meaning thanks to the pressure of the premise and script. How our memory contains the parts of a loved one are played out in art. I personally think the movie could have gained from a much more varied approach in its camera perspective, with more parallel shots from subject to object while painting Eloise. I think a great deal more could have been done to heighten this idea of a ghost story in the movie's third act, as a way perhaps to build on the idea that Marianne is remembering this story. The movie is coherent, yes, but it misses out on some aspects of a haunted love story that could have been applied here to greater effect. While not perfect, The film offers more than most films, so a 4 out of 5 exists here as well. Not a lot of movies have been done about the process of art in the form of painting. We certainly have movies about artists, biopics that attempt to explain in a one-to-one fashion how the experience of a painter's life manifested itself onto the canvas. But in return, the process of the art itself goes by the wayside. There are several moments, as Marianne discovers Eloise, where the movie explores how art is done, what deceptions are necessary, and how those choices affect the final product. While a doomed LGBTQ relationship is not as original, the use of art in the movie is. Anyone who has attempted art will find themselves enthralled by the statements made by the visuals as well as the characters. The fact that Siama found painter Aline Delmer through Instagram is nothing short of extraordinary. It is difficult to imagine the movie without her paintings, without her style. It is not just her work, but the process on display that seems to be the most original aspect, and when rewatching, it is now the thing I remember most vividly about the film. For being more original in its subject matter than its narrative, a 4 out of 5 seems ideal. Averaging these scores, a 4 out of 5 makes sense for my perception of the movie and for explaining perhaps the wealth of high praise that followed from it. I will say that I have a lot of bias here, as the movie directly addresses many qualities of what I find pleasing in films. I adore artist and muse movies. I love a diegetic soundscape, as well as even and natural light. Its context as a haunted ghost story wrapped in a fairy tale calls to my love for Beauty and the Beast, and its attention to art is something I cannot help but fall for. I would highly recommend this film both for its technical expertise as well as for its atmosphere and tone. For anyone who needs a little faster pace, or who needs tension and play out with action or horror, I would highly recommend avoiding this movie. I happen to believe it is a highly rewatchable and beautiful film. Thanks again for watching.